So, hello.
Hello.
Today I have the honor to present you José Serebrier, who is world famous in several countries and less world famous in several other countries. So, in Germany, people don't know him as well as in the United States of America, or as in Spain, or as in Finland, or as in South
Australia.
America. Yeah. Hmm?
Australia. And we were
Australia,
born in
and so on.
Australia.
I don't know all the countries. And Jose has a unique has made a unique career. And my main question to Jose beforehand was, can you tell us how it worked that you almost never were a chief conductor? So you had nothing on the hand to do exchange of profit for other conductors and such things. And doing this remarkable way you did. And maybe I just introduced that you come from Uruguay. Of course, your parents are not Uruguayan. They come from Jewish,
Russia and Poland.
Jewish
Russia,
Polish,
Poland.
and Jewish Russian.
Yes.
And so they went to Uruguay in difficult times, probably. And but you can tell us a bit about that. And then you were a kind of wunderkind as a conductor, and you came to the United States, and you were under the wings of people like Aaron Copland and Vittorio Giannini, and then conductors like George Szell and Antál Doráti and Pierre Monteux, and then finally Leopold Stokowski. And so you can tell us, of course, about these things because it's immensely interesting. And so we can just start the turning point in your life was Utica in a way, in a way.
Yes, perhaps it was my first orchestra, as far as I can remember. Yes, Utica was a semi-professional orchestra, by the way. Very good semi-professional orchestra.
But how did that happen? You were
Oh,
in the car with Seiji Ozawa coming from Tanglewood, where you had
yes,
attended a course by Pierre Monteux.
yes. So what happened is we stopped for a cup of coffee at night, late at night, it was 11 p.m.
Which year are we now? 1960 or?
1958, let me see. Yes, probably 1960. I'll remember quickly. But in any case, we stopped and we saw the local newspaper, big thing saying tonight, auditions for a new conductor of the Utica Symphony. And we thought, I wonder if it's still time to, I mean, I'm sure it's all been taken, but let's try. We had nothing, we had no plans for the future. So we called and they said, oh, no, there is still time. Would you both come? Now, Seiji decided not to do the audition, Seiji Ozawa, because he had a quick telephone call from one of his mentors, Leonard Bernstein, saying that he wanted to talk to him about future plans. So I did the audition, and I impressed the musicians immediately by something which to me is like drinking a glass of water. I solfege the notes. I sing, please play that do mi, do fa, do sol. They looked up like I was talking. They, for Latin prepared, schooled musicians, France, Italy, Spain, all over South America, Belgium. Solfege is like the alphabet. It's so simple. But in Anglo-Saxon countries, they're always very impressed by it. They think it's like magic. So I got the job. I got the job. And the conductor, music director of the Utica Symphony was my first orchestra, and it was a interesting experience.
How long did it last?
Until I got two things happen. One is a very bad experience, my first bad experience in this music world. That the ladies, every American orchestra, they're private. American orchestras are not like in Europe or United States, or I mean Europe or South America. They are private institutions, so they are handled differently, and each one of them has a ladies committee, which really dictates many things. Not so much these days, but in those days. We're talking about the 1960s. And the ladies committee told me I should fire the concertmaster and name this gentleman who was the husband of the president of the ladies committee. The ladies committee president wanted her husband to be, actually he wanted to be the conductor, but meantime he will accept concertmaster. I refused. I was 18 or 19. I said the concertmaster is first class. He's liked by everybody, and I can't just go ahead and fire him. I mean, I'm not going to do that. So they said, okay, then in that case, we get a different conductor. I had to leave.
How
And
long,
sure enough,
how long have you been there? 1 year or
2 years.
2 years?
I was 2 seasons. They passed me the contract to be another 2 seasons, which I returned to them. I said, no, I'm not going to fire the concertmaster. I'm not doing that. So they hire a young graduate from Juilliard, conducting student, I'm sure very talented. They told him the same thing. He said, of course, he fired the concertmaster. That created a huge, the orchestra went on strike. The public sent letters to the papers. Result is the orchestra stopped. It's never a Utica Symphony. They went out of business. That's what happened. So,
Incredible.
yeah, so that was my first so-called professional, semi-professional experience. So what else? My next experience was good because Stokowski had just written to me asking if I would like to become associate conductor. What happened is I wrote to him. I gave myself a vacation after the experience in Utica. I went to Mexico, some fantastic resort, and I saw announced that Stokowski was starting his new orchestra in Carnegie Hall. So I sent him a telegram. There were telegrams. This is before email. There was no email. Saying, can I help you audition musicians? He wrote right back, like 1 minute later, said, no, I do my own auditions because I want a special quality of sound. I want special things from each player, but you will be my associate conductor. I couldn't believe my luck. And he said, so that was fantastic, best 5 years ever. But there was a problem in that, if you don't mind me telling you, private problems. This is the first time I talk about this, by the way. He had a manager of the orchestra, Stuart Warkow, Warkow.
Which orchestra was that now?
American Symphony Orchestra.
American Symphony, which
Yeah.
was situated in New York?
New York City, Carnegie Hall, lived in Carnegie Hall. And I'll tell you something which is first time, no one knows about this. It was created because someone came to see Stokowski to ask him to conduct this new orchestra. He was forming for him. No one knew his name. He was known as El Gordo. El Gordo. El Gordo went to Stokowski, said, we have the funding. Stokowski is fantastic. We'll do 10 concerts. It'll be done first Sunday morning and then Monday evening. So El Gordo hired Carnegie Hall, sold the ticket subscription. They sold it immediately because Stokowski was a legend. Then the Gordo, el manager, disappeared with all the money of the tickets. This has never been revealed before to the public. Stokowski kept it under wraps because he didn't want people to know that he was made a fool of, which he was. You know, the man never intended to have a season. 10 concert
He paid
subscriptions.
himself for everything.
Sorry?
So he paid himself for everything.
Yes, the first season, yes, there was no other, because it was to happen immediately. Stokowski was very wealthy by then, extremely wealthy. So yes, he paid for everything and everything. So, but the ticket sales were immediately sold out, and El Gordo escaped with all the money, and Stokowski didn't want this to be known to the public because he didn't want to be made a fool of. He was so careful about his image to the extent that one day, after that, Stokowski fell in the bathtub. He fell down, he slipped, broke a hip. He continued to conduct a few months later with a cane. You can see it on YouTube, with a cane because he fell. But he didn't want people to know that he fell down in the bathtub. People might laugh. So he said to the press, he fell down while playing with his children. He had the last 2 children from Gloria Vanderbilt. He married Gloria Vanderbilt when he was 79 and she was 26. She left him eventually for another famous figure, Frank Sinatra.
Yes, and he made a last contract with Columbia when he was 90 years old. He made a 10 years contract.
That's right.
He could not fulfill it because he died 5 years after.
Yeah, well, we couldn't help that.
But
But
he still did the most youthful Bizet Symphony and Mendelssohn Italian Symphony in those years, yeah, which is absolutely incredible.
oh, fantastic.
Maybe I say something about Stokowski because, of course, for somebody like you, he was family, but people today many don't know. So we can simply say he was the most legendary emigre conductor in the United States at his time when Toscanini was away, and he was the great legend also of orchestration of making arrangements which are incredible, and he was the sound magician himself, yeah.
Sorry, let's close the door.
And so
Yeah.
so you had the good luck that I think 2 years or 4 years before he already had conducted your first symphony.
More than that, I think I was 17 when he wanted to premiere the Ives Fourth Symphony, so-called Unplayable, with the Houston Symphony. The players couldn't get past the first few notes, so he didn't know what to do. He closed the score, and a cellist in his orchestra said, "Maestro, look at this score." He said, "What is this?" A 17-year-old student at Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. Let me see. Great, immediately. We'll do this instead. He played my symphony. And very quickly, another anecdote. He announced it as a replacement for the Ives Fourth Symphony, the Unplayable, a first symphony by a 17-year-old composer. And he invited the press, he invited Time Magazine, Newsweek, New York Times. He was very publicity oriented. And they all came. And I was interviewed by Time Magazine with hours. Nothing came out because the same night that he premiered my first symphony, the first Sputnik went up. Russia, in fact, won the race at that time with the United States. The
Yuri
first time,
Gagarin.
yeah, see, first time, the same night. No, I used to remember the date, November something, or 1957, first Sputnik. So all the news. So I called the person who interviewed me from Time Magazine 2 weeks later. Said, "When is it coming out?" He said, "I'm sorry, my boy, my friend. It's old news now. It's 2 weeks old or 3 weeks, and it's no news anymore because it's all about science now. For 2 months, it was all about science." Okay, so that was my. But the good news is, a few years later, Stokowski organized the American Symphony, and he named me associate conductor.
Yeah, but going back to your student years, so you
Yes.
studied at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia.
Yes.
And so your main composition teacher was Vittorio Giannini?
He was the only one there. In summers, I studied with Aaron Copland at Tanglewood, but Giannini was the only teacher there. I actually was accepted to Curtis by Bohuslav Martinou. He's the one who accepted me, and then I met him, and then he apologized. He had to leave. He will never come back to America because, and I said, it can be told now, so many years later. Every time he arrived, his check arrived to payment for there was always a deduction. On February 20, deducted 22 cents. On March 11, deducted $3.59 from his salary for teaching at Curtis. So he asked, "Why is this? What is this?" Because you were late for class. The trains in those days from New York to Philadelphia took 4 hours. Now they take 2 hours. Sometimes they were later. He was late for class, your deduction. So he was so offended. So I never had a class. But he was the one who accepted me to Curtis. Giannini was a friend more than a teacher. He looked at my scores. He said, "Oh, this looks wonderful. Let's go have some coffee."
Really? But he was
Yeah.
a fantastic teacher because when we or did also Nicolas Flagello come to him, and he was already a complete composer when he came, maybe. Yeah. So but he was a fantastic composer. He was a complete.
He was a friend. In my case, he looked at my scores. He said they look great. He never had one. I don't remember a single suggestion. But Copland was also not a wonderful composer, of course, very famous, but not the best teacher. He looked at my music and said, "Oh, we must get this performed." I remember there was still the International Music Festival in Venezuela in those days. So he recommended it to the festival, and they played it. So he was more like a mentor than a teacher. I never really had a composition teacher except, you know, Otto Lunin. You will know, but most people wouldn't know who he
Yeah,
was.
yeah, he became then later a 12-tone composer.
Later on in life, yes. But Lunin was famous as a flute player and composer. Anyway, I took him
He was an emigre also.
from someplace, yes. So I
Yeah.
showed him my score of mine, and he had one suggestion. This movement, I don't remember which work, is too short. Make it 10 more minutes here. That was his one suggestion, which I did, and it worked. But composition cannot really be taught, same as conducting. You know, you
But,
have to.
Jose, you recorded some learning for oboe and strings
Yes,
and flute
yes,
and
yes.
strings
You're
on one
right.
of
My
your
first
CDs.
record, my
Hmm?
first recording. I went
It's
to,
very beautiful. It's very beautiful. I like
yeah,
the music. But I must say that I particularly like Giannini. I think he was a great genius composer, but he's unknown because people thought he's from another epoch. Yeah.
his music was. I used to play his music all the time when I was conducting. I could choose my own music. Fresco Valdiana was a work of his that I played all over the world. I remember. And I used to do that music. I did lots of music by Peter Menin. Remember Peter Menin
He is
was
phenomenal. For me, he is the greatest US symphonist ever.
absolutely. So I did his music all over the world. And William Schumann wrote a fantastic violin concerto, among other pieces. But the violin concerto I played all over the world, and so on. Also, Roger Sessions, a great composer,
Yeah.
not played much these days. But you can still see on YouTube by conducting Roger Sessions' Sixth Symphony with the Juilliard Orchestra.
Really?
Yeah, it's still on YouTube.
Also
With
12th tone, strict 12th tone, probably.
very
Yeah.
interesting composer. Milton Babbitt was another one,
Mm.
very strict 12 tone. I never played his music, but he was a very important figure in American music.
Yeah. Jose, when you were, maybe you can just tell us a bit what you learned from Doráti, what you
Yes,
learned from Szell, and what you
yes.
learned from Monteux, and what you learned from Stokowski.
Oh my. So we started with Dorothy. I was, I read, I was in New York. I finished Curtis. I graduated. I didn't know what to do next. And I read that Doráti was then the conductor of the Minneapolis Symphony, now called Minnesota Orchestra. He was looking for an apprentice conductor. And he came to New York, and I sent him a telegram in those days saying, I'm interested. So he said, good, meet me tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. in my hotel, the Great Northern Hotel across from Carnegie Hall. Conduct a symphony from memory. So I wrote back and said, which orchestra? There is no orchestra in my hotel. Just come and conduct it. If I hear the music through your gestures, I'll know what you have. So I said, fine, 7 in the morning. So I took an early train at 4 in the morning from Philadelphia to New York, arriving in those days 4 hours later. And at 7 a.m., I went straight to his hotel. He was still in his bathrobe. And he said, don't worry, I'm shaving. He was in the bathroom, but I can see you from the mirror. I said, funny, but it's true. Conduct whatever. Don't tell me what you're conducting. If I can hear the music through your gestures, I know what you have. So Schubert Unfinished was in those days my work pieces. So began to conduct in Schubert Unfinished, and all kinds of interruptions. His beautiful daughter Tonina walked by, and she saw me making these gestures. She said, "Oh my!" She walked by. Then the breakfast lady arrived with a tray. She dropped it when she saw me going like this with the big climax of the symphony. She dropped it, thinking it was a crazy man there. Then Doráti came back laughing, drying his hair, his face. He said, "You have it. You have it on. You're on. If you can continue keeping the tempo and make, you did Schubert Unfinished, didn't you?" I said, "Yes. How do you know?" It's obvious. Schubert Unfinished. First movement, up to the development. Great. Okay, so he gave me the details. You come to Minneapolis and you'll be my apprentice conductor, my first title. 2 years, fantastic years. So every uh, Monday night, I think, we'll meet in his study, go over the score. So he studied the score with me together. And some of the advice he gave me, I still remember now. Bowings. He was a cellist, but he had inherited this fantastic bowing technique from one of his teachers. And then we went downstairs, had dinner with the family, and then I'll tell you a quick anecdote. He invited me to his concert with the orchestra, And I sat next to his daughter, Tonina, who was my age. And he became very upset. He was in the podium. He saw me sitting next to his daughter. He was Hungarian, you know, from the old days. This is 1950s, 1960s. He thought I paralyzed for a moment. He looked like he was going to give a speech. And afterwards, I was supposed to drive back with him to the city. There was an out-of-town concert. He said, "You go with the orchestra." Bye. He was very upset. Until he got to know me a little bit, then in fact he will arrange dates for me to date Tonina, who was, this is in early 60s in Minneapolis, you know. And he will take, he said, "Children, go with me to the movies." So we walked 2 blocks to the movie, and as we arrived, he said, "Oh, I have to do something. You just escort Tonina." So anyway, later on, Tonina made the news when she was dated by Van Cliburn. He had just won the Tchaikovsky competition. He was a national. There was a parade in New York for him. You know, this is when Russia and the United States were at their worst. He won the competition in Russia. Now, so Van Cliburn was not interested in ladies and girls. He went along, you know, he escorted her. And so that, anyway, I had a great experience with Doráti as a teacher. I learned a great deal. Monteux was different. He had 100 students in the state of Maine. You have to play in the orchestra. I played in the viola section. And then once a month, you got up to conduct for a few minutes. And he will sit on his chair and just make comments. Who else was my teacher? Szell. I never studied with Szell. I was composer in residence, but watching him rehearse was the best lesson in the world.
I want to ask you something about Szell, because I read this very amusing autobiography by Angel Brusilov, Shoot the Conductor, very funny. And Angel was associate concertmaster in Cleveland before Ormandy took him to Philadelphia as concertmaster. And so he describes the difference between Szell and Ormandy, that when he came to Philadelphia, he played just on the beat. And Ormandy was totally irritated and would always only say, "We are the Philadelphia Orchestra." That was his criticism. But so he realized that with Szell, you had to play exactly on the beat. But with Ormandy, also with Karajan, for example, you played always when the arm moves up. Yeah. So we have an explanation why we have this incredible precision in Szell's.
Do I? Asking me a question.
Yeah, because it's absolutely on the beat. Yeah.
But that part of it. But also, you know, one day I remember Szell rehearsing a Haydn symphony, number 49, nicknamed La Passione. And I saw the programs. I said, nowhere in the programs, Haydn 49. Why is he doing that? Wasting time. All right. Then 2 weeks later, he found he had 20 minutes left. Haydn, La Passione. Then 3 months later, an hour left. All Haydn, all over again, violin salon. So then I realized what he was doing. Haydn seems to be the most difficult, more difficult than Mozart for classical orchestras. You see very few Haydn performances. So by the time it came time to play it the following year, it was a jewel. It was like perfection. He played it little by little. So that was part of his technique. He was also an incredible pianist. He didn't play a string instrument, which bothered him. Doráti was a cellist, but Szell didn't. Szell was a pianist, but he put his own bowings, you know, the orchestras. The orchestra used to make fun of that. Cleveland Orchestra said, "Our bowings are the favorite bowings of 9 out of every 10 pianists."
But both Szell and Doráti were composers also. Yeah. So Szell was, I think, not a great composer. Doráti was more interesting as a composer.
Yes, indeed.
But so if you had this long time with Doráti and then you came to Szell, so what did you learn particularly from Szell? The art of rehearsing.
Very important, yes. How to rehearse, and then he controlled. Now, I said he didn't play a string instrument, he put bowings. So I decided I have a whole collection in my London apartment of orchestral parts with bowings. Very important. When I went to work with Stokowski, it was like a cold bath. He hated using strict buoyance. In fact, if he saw two players use the same up or the same down, he said, don't. If your partner plays down, you play up. That was part of the secret of his amazing sound. I used that trick, it's a trick really, for passages. There is a passage in the Planets by Holst with only strings, and I used that. At first, the orchestra look at me, they never heard of separate bowings, but it works like magic because the bow naturally loses a little bit of power going down, is obviously less control, and it gains power going up. So if you have separate bowings, suddenly the sound becomes, which is Stokowski's sound. But unfortunately, he used it for everything he conducted. So I remember going to a rehearsal with Stokowski just to attend it with the Boston Symphony. I happened to be in Tanglewood, and he was, by then he was an old friend. So I went to his rehearsal, and the players refused to play open free bowings. The management came in and they said, please do as Maestro asks, it won't harm you. So they reluctantly used free bowings, and they realized he gave the sound for specific passages an amazing volume, because the bows didn't. So he used it. I use it only in very specific passages, as I said, in the Planets of Holst and other things. Never in the classics, Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, but it works in some things. He used it all the time. He has specific ideas about sound, and he made the sound of the Philadelphia Orchestra, became this sound, thanks partially to free bowings. And also the sitting. I imitated his sitting for a while, realized it didn't work. He didn't have the winds in front.
The setting of the orchestra. The setting of the orchestra.
Yes, sitting of the orchestra, not the public, the orchestra. Yeah. So traditionally, in Germany it's different. In Austria, you have the violas on the right side and the cellos inside. In America, it's first violins, second violins, violas, cellos, basses behind in general.
That is also was the Celibidache tradition, Furtwängler, they all did that.
Yes. So Stokowski decided the winds are too far away. He put the winds on the right side, right to his right arm. That was good visually, but sound-wise, not so good in my opinion. The sound went this way instead of towards the audience. But visually it was great. Suddenly the winds can be seen. He put the horns in the back on a big podium in front of the basses. So the sound will bounce on the basses. That was a great idea. He was always experimenting with this. I tried it. I remember I conducted in Norway and Sweden and Israel, and I tried to use that, and it didn't quite work. I went back to the original, the old-fashioned way with the strings around and the winds in front.
Yes. So he was really an experimentator, and
Yes.
he was also conducting so much contemporary music. I think he was the absolute pioneer record conductor of world premieres. It's incredible. People don't know that today. He did,
right.
And every style. Yeah. Also Metropolis did that, but Metropolis lived too short to do the same. But this was this incredible versatility of doing everything contemporary, everything. So opposite to Szell, who of course did some Laszlo Leiter or some Peter Menin, but most of all of William Walton, but he didn't conduct very much contemporary music at all.
No.
Yeah.
Stokowski was unique, and that was the reason he lost his job in Philadelphia. By the way, there were two conductors that lost their positions. They were fired. They were let go because they did too much contemporary music. One was Stokowski. They fired him because of doing too much, even though he was the #1 conductor with Toscanini, and he was more famous in a way than Toscanini because he was in the movie Fantasia by Walt Disney. Yeah. So he was like a Hollywood star, and yet the board, so famous. See, the problem with American orchestras is they have this board of directors made up by bankers and people not in the music field, and they resented it. Another conductor was one of my conducting teachers, Eleazar de Carvalho, the most prominent South American conductor at the time. He was a protege of Kusevitsky at the same time as Leonard Bernstein. Kusevitsky had two main proteges in Boston, Leonard Bernstein and Eleazar de Carvalho. Eleazar de Carvalho he told Bernstein, you do Schubert, Brahms, Maros. Carvalho, because he was a tuba player in a band before he went there. He was a bit, really beautiful looking man. He could have been a movie actor. But he was a bit rough on the edges musically. So Kusevitsky told him, you must conduct only contemporary music. Don't try to do Beethoven and certainly not Mozart. So he got his first job in St. Louis in America and began to do all contemporary. He was fired off immediately because
Metropolis the same with New York Philharmonic. Yeah. Also there was the criticism because he did too much unknown and contemporary stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, amazing, interesting.
So, Jose, these are very interesting things. I want to ask you now. When you stopped in Utica, you made a decision which lasted for the rest of your life. That is how you told it to me some time ago. Not to become chief conductor of any orchestra anymore.
True.
Can you explain that?
Yes. Well, in Utica, it made sense because, as I told you a moment ago, the ladies' committee, which controlled everything there, told me I should fire the concertmaster and put the husband of one of her as concertmaster, which I refused to do because it was, I was not ready for politics. I was 19, and it was not right to do. So it was a bad experience that prepared me for that. Then when I became associate conductor, it was the best thing that happened to me. I accepted the position with Stokowski at Carnegie Hall as associate conductor, age 19, of the American Symphony Orchestra. It was fantastic. But there he had a manager of the orchestra, Mr. Stuart Warkow, Warkow, who recently made in Times obituary because he committed suicide. Was a very mixed up person, very mixed up person. He was, it's hard to tell, but these days you can say. The fact that he was a homosexual is not such news, but he went after children. And that's really, he was a sick person, Stuart Warkow. But he became the manager of the orchestra. I don't know why. And as such, he hated me with a passion. I think it was jealousy because he saw me with Stokowski. Every time Stokowski had an important friend, like Khachaturian, Rachmaninoff, all the great artists of the day, Prokofiev, Shostakovich, when he played their music, he invited them for dinner at the Russian tea room, and he always, no, for lunch, always included me. To have a young associate conductor, was 19, 20, 21 at the time. He thought it was a charming thing to do, and I just sat there in awe of these fantastic figures. All same thing with soloists, with Misha Elman, Heifetz, and so on. But the manager was never included. Stuart Warkow was always treated well. Stokowski was very, polite, respectful, but he never invited him to have a coffee or anything, nothing. Also, he knew Warkow that was invited on weekends to visit Stokowski in his country house. Stokowski decided to buy a country home, which was very enormous, because he had these two children by Gloria Vanderbilt. He only had them on weekends. When they broke up, so you can have them on weekends. So in the city weekends, he felt it was better. They were 12 and 14 to go to the country. So he bought a country house. And he invited me. I went there almost every Sunday. I drove over, and there are letters you can see in the book. Stokowski, I love a maestro who strong maestro, who plays soccer, football, who plays football. They call it soccer in Americas, and with my two kids, and always brings a different girl. He wrote. I did that to impress him because I knew he was a ladies' man, famous ladies' man. So I brought different girls each time just to impress him.
But he was like a father in a way?
Oh, yes, very much like a father to me, absolutely. He kind of adopted me, really. And I never knew why, because when he played my first symphony in Houston, I was 17. And I told him I would like to become a conductor. I mentioned that, would you have an advice for me? Yes, go around the world and watch all the bad conductors and learn what not to do. Anyway, it didn't work that way. I learned from watching great conductors like Szell, Stokowski, Pierre Monteux, and so on. So working with him as associate conductor was a fantastic experience. First of all, he did something that nobody else does to this day. He was the first one to arrive at the Carnegie Hall stage. Rehearsal at 10 a.m. No matter how early I arrived, 9:15, he was already on the podium. The result of that, which nobody else did or does, players began to arrive earlier and earlier and look at the music privately, with one exception, a cellist called Charlotte Moorman, who became famous for a different reason. She would arrive 1 minute before 10. He called her to his office and told her, then she began to arrive earlier. Charlotte Moorman was a cellist, became very famous. She gave a recital topless. She gave a recital without a bra on a cello. And it came out in the front page of one of the New York papers, not the New York Times, but the New York Post. Front page, topless cellist.
And, in Berlin, they have now a string quartet which calls itself Naked String Quartet. All the four play without anything.
Are there any ladies there?
Ladies.
All ladies, really?
I don't know whether they are all ladies. I know that there are ladies in the quartet, and they get articles in several papers, of course, because they play in clubs.
One way to get publicity, I guess. Anyway, Charlotte Moorman was a good friend. She was a good cellist, and she became known as a topless cellist. So she was in the orchestra. But anyway, she arrived 1 minute before 10. Stokowski was there, no matter how early. He was already standing on the podium, sitting on the podium, on a stool. And the reason I think he did it was so the players would little by little come early by themselves and start looking at the music privately, which they did. But today, as you know, conductors arrive after the orchestra has tuned. The orchestra is tuned already, then it shows up. The orchestra stands up, say good morning, and it starts.
Yeah, so I like his attitude. I think that it is much more serious. Yeah.
So what else did you ask me about Stokowski? So anyway, I was associate conductor with the idea that if he ever got sick, I will take over. But in 5 years, he never got sick in those days. So I never took over. But the first year, I just watched. Second year, he gave me half a concert. Carnegie Hall was fantastic. And the third year, I had a whole concert for myself.
Oh, fantastic.
And then the best experience, which you can still see on YouTube, he invented a series of concerts called Teenage Concerts. And he made an arrangement with all the high schools in New York City to send their students, not music students, every students, for concerts of 10 to 11 a.m. and 12 to 1 p.m. And he conducted the opening and the last number, and I conducted all the middle pieces so that the students will feel a rapport, because I was their age, more or less. I was, just a few years older. And he sat on a stool by me when I conducted. First thing he did was pick up the baton that I used, gave it to me with the disgusting look in his face, because as he was famous for only using hands, hated batons. Batons, what is that? It's a piece of wood, no expressiveness. It's just a wood. So he gave me the baton like this. I used the baton purposely to show him I was not being influenced by him. Otherwise, slow movements, I still use my hands because it's more expressive. But for fast movements with a long, orchestra, trombones sitting all the way back, a baton, I think, helps because it's the distance.
Yes.
Anyway.
The precision. But then you did, with him, he did the world premiere performance of the Ives Fourth Symphony. And he had 2 associate conductors, because at that time, people thought we cannot conduct it alone.
Yes.
So how was this experience?
Well, first experience with the Ives Fourth was the reason that he played my first symphony was he couldn't get the Ives Fourth.
Yeah.
In Houston. They couldn't get
through the Fourth was a piece of destiny for you.
Yeah, indeed, a piece of destiny. So he didn't know what to do. It didn't work. He tried 2 bars in Houston. He was the conductor, Houston Symphony. It didn't go. So a cellist in the orchestra, Harvey Wolf, a cellist in the orchestra, said, how about this piece? Was my symphony. let's do this. Now, few conductors today or even then will just say, yes, let's do this. They will do something they know very well, in the repertoire. He said, he was always doing new pieces. So, and in Carnegie Hall in New York, started several seasons with one of my works, always. He wanted the premiere of one of my works. And sometimes surprised me. 1 month before, he said, do you have a new piece? I want to include. It was marvelous. Great luck, really, great luck, great fortune. And then he decided to go back to England. But you were surprised that he paid for the orchestra himself, because the man who started the orchestra, this so-called El Gordo, took all the money away from the ticket sales, left for Mexico. No one heard of him. Stokowski didn't want this to be known by the public. This is the first time, as far as I can tell, that is being told. He decided to pay for the orchestra himself in order not to appear like he was made a fool of.
Yes.
So he was so afraid of his image. No, not afraid, but careful about his image. So then one day took the elevator in his Fifth Avenue apartment during the second season. And this lady said, Maestro, the orchestra is so expensive. How do you finance it? And a lady who lived in the building, Fifth Avenue. I pay for it myself. How can you do that? Let me help you, she said. And that started. She got a group from then on the third season, fourth season, he didn't have to pay for it. The ladies' committees and so on. But that came with also traps, as it happens in American orchestras. They dictated who conducts, who plays, what they play, and so on. It wasn't just free money. But he was able to. He had become a very wealthy man by then, Stokowski, through royalties and movies. Let me just parenthesis, a little anecdote. I was conducting in London not long ago, and a lady backstage, it was in Cadogan Hall. I go out to sign autographs, and there were about 20 people, and this lady in the back said, Maestro, I am Diana Durbin. And I didn't pay attention. I didn't hear it. I am Diana Durbin, Maestro. I didn't hear it. I've been heartbroken about it ever since. 2 days later, I saw in the London Times, the famous Diana Durbin died in Paris. She had taken the train. She had made a movie with Stokowski called 100 Men and a Girl. One of the various movies that Stokowski made, in which the girl was Diana Durbin, who started singing. While the orchestra was playing, he turned around in the movie. Keep singing, don't stop. She was amazing. And he engaged her and he made her famous. Anyway, she had come to my concert, remembering that I was associated with Stokowski. And it didn't dawn on me that I was the Diana Durbin. So she died 2 days later. And I never got to say hello or to invite her to meet her. So, yes.
So we come to Ives 4.
Ives 4.
Field performance, yeah.
So my first encounter with Ives' Fourth Symphony was because Stokowski and the Houston Symphony could not play it, and they played my First Symphony instead, which was a great encounter. Next time I encountered was when Stokowski premiered it finally in New York, and the piece needed 3 conductors, 2 in front and 1 in the back. The one in the back was only to conduct the percussion in the fourth movement, which is no relation to the rest of the symphony, but he just played the percussion. But you can see it on YouTube, Stokowski and myself conducting Ives Fourth. It's still there. For some reason, I decided, I know what I did. I looked at the parts, the set of parts from which the players play, and I had to find out what the problem was with this piece. Because Stokowski needed 3 months of rehearsals to do it. He got a special grant from one of the big foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, to pay for the orchestra to rehearse 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, Ives Fourth Symphony for 3 months. Finally, they played it. I said, that's impossible. When I was engaged, RCA Records was a big company in those days, and they asked me to record it again. I said, how much time are you giving me? 4 days, 4 rehearsals, 1 a day. Impossible, won't work. So they said, well, then you cannot do it. So I decided to look at the music, at the parts. I saw what the problem was. They were manuscript parts. So this is a story which is not been told as far as I can tell. I spent 6 months of my life making a new set of parts. Clear. This is before computers could do it. There were no computers. I wrote it by hand, cleaned up everything. I used the original parts. I didn't copy them, but I cleaned them up and I made it possible. And before playing it in London, recording it, I thought I'll try it out someplace. And this is another story with the Brno, BRNO orchestra in the Czech Republic. But the day before I went there, they told me the music never arrived from London. So we had to use the old Kramny set of parts. And somehow we did it. Then by the time I arrived in London, the set of parts were there with my bowings for the strings. How do I do this piece, which is unplayable? So I had an idea, which the management thought it was a ridiculous idea, but they did it. I'll rehearse the flute salon from 9 to 12, Monday morning, the oboes 12 to 3, clarinets 3 to 6, fagots, bassoons 6 to 9, French horns 9 to 12. So I rehearsed 12 hours non-stop. I had a coffee in between, but the orchestra could never play any place because there's always a section missing. The cantante would say, wait a minute, where are the second violins? They are with Maestro Serebrier rehearsing the Ives Fourth. So the orchestra was unavailable for a week, but I got to rehearse each section 3 hours, and only the difficult passages, not by note. By the time the orchestra got together, it was perfect. There was no problem. They knew it. So I solved the problem. And we recorded it for RCA. A very successful recording. It won a Grammy and all kinds of things.
It was the first time that it was conducted by only one conductor.
Yes, yes.
So you made the first recording with Stokowski and the second you alone. Yeah.
Yes.
And then several other people came afterwards, like Michael Tilson Thomas and so on. Yeah. So
oh yeah, yes, of course.
And it was a breakthrough you created. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I have to tell you, Leonard Bernstein, whom I knew casually, but we knew each other, he called me and he said, Jose, hello. Someone told me Bernstein, he was already the most famous conductor. He's about to call you. His manager told me. 10 minutes later, he called. Actually, he called me twice. Once he called me to who are you voting for the national elections? You must vote for Carter, President Carter, to be. Please, his voice was gone because he looked at the S comes at the end of the thing. By then, his voice was, I said, well, if I vote, I will decide. All right. Next time he called me was for me to agree to conduct the Ives Fourth with him. He had been at the premiere with Stokowski. Remember, he had been to the premiere with his protege, Seiji Ozawa. Seiji Ozawa, that's a good idea. And I were very good friends. He was my roommate when we were students at Tanglewood. You know, they put us together because neither of us spoke English very well, so they put us together. We became good friends. By then, Seiji Ozawa, what happened is just a parenthesis, interesting story. Bernstein had 3 assistant conductors every year at the New York Philharmonic. And Seiji was one of them. When they were finished, they were saying goodbye, thank you, I get 3 others. Seiji went back to Japan, and he had a terrible time. The orchestras refused to play with him. They said, you become too American. So he called Lenny Bernstein, said, crying, this is what happened to me. Oh, forget it. Come here. I'll help you. Indeed, the best thing happened to him. Otherwise, he would still be in Japan. He came back. Lenny recommended him to Boston, to San Francisco. And of course, he was enormously talented. The rest is history. But it happened because he had a hard time in his home country at that time. So it's amazing that he made such a fantastic, well-deserved career because there was still a great prejudice against Japanese in America at the time. Was still there was after the war still. And he was kind of an adventurer. He had arrived in Europe by motorbike from Japan. And he won a competition in Besançon, France, conduct competition. The rest is history. Anyway, I bypassed my story about Ives Fourth.
Jose, now the really interesting question for many people, particularly for conductors, is what do you think? How did you manage to do so much conducting without having a chief position?
Well, as I mentioned, I avoided after my bad experience in Utica, which I was very young, so I really didn't have to. And then a bad experience at the end, I told you with Stokowski's orchestra, the manager, I didn't come to these details, was Stuart Warco, who died recently by suicide. And Warco hated me with a passion because I was Stokowski's friend, always invited to dinner, was invited to every time an artist came, I was invited. And he was never invited to anything. He was just the manager. Stokowski said, come here. Tomorrow we rehearse this. Okay, bye. I mean, politely, but kind of. Warko was a sick man. And every time Stokowski recommended me to an orchestra, which he did regularly, with beautiful letters, they are published in that book, I think, by Michel Fauré. Warko will follow up with a phone call and say, well, Stokowski is correct. He's the best conductor you can get. However, you have to understand, he will never accept an invitation from your board people for dinner. He will never go out with any of your board members. He will never socialize. He'll never help you with fundraising. Fundraising in American orchestras is crucial. Yeah. He will never accept to go and speak to the clubs or anything. So if you want a conductor like that who will leave you as soon as he finishes and go around the world conducting, he's what you need. But if you want someone who will help you raise money and circulate with your board members, he's the wrong man. So as a result, Stokowski invited me to wrote, and the orchestras replied, remember, important orchestras, thank you so much, we will invite you. As soon as I got this note from Warko, I never heard from them again, because they need fundraising in America is just as important as a conductor, sometimes more important.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. So you asked, my question was, why didn't I become a conductor of a major orchestra? Well, I accepted a few positions. I accepted the position as music director of a festival in Massachusetts, Worcester Music Festival. It's right outside Massachusetts, and the players were members of the Boston Symphony, so they're wonderful players. I spent several seasons there. And I decided to make my own festival in Miami. Festival Miami became very important and sponsored by the University of Miami. It was a very expensive festival. We invited the London Symphony, the Royal Philharmonic, the London Philharmonic as guests, New York Philharmonic. I brought in the American Symphony twice. In fact, we brought the American Symphony playing the Ives Fourth to Miami Festival, which I conducted. Part of the secret to do that was I went to see the head of British Airways in New York, and I brought him a copy of LP in those days of Prokofiev, Peter and the Wolf, narrated by Mrs. Prokofiev, Lena Prokofiev. And he hit the right, I didn't know, it was intuition, I guess. The head of British Airways said, oh, my children love this work. It's their favorite. And I said, well, Mrs. Prokofiev, Lena, I would like to invite her to come to Miami and narrate it, which he did. He gave her a Concorde. In those days, it was a Concorde flight. And when she arrived in Miami, the head of British Airways from London came to receive her. As she came off the plane, she came with her son, who was a very good friend of mine, wonderful man. He was not a musician. He was a sculptor of very hanging sculptures. Very unusual, very talented man, wonderful man. So they arrived, they came off the plane. The head of British Airways asked her, Mrs. Prokofiev, how did you like your flight on a Concorde on British Airways? I hated it. She was the most difficult woman in the world. In fact, Stalin had sent her to the Gulag for 8 years. Stalin, yeah, she was in the Gulag for 8 years. And Prokofiev thought she had died. She never heard from her again. So he married again. Prokofiev was a bigamist. He didn't know it until he died, because he thought she had died, never heard from her. So when he died, he had the unfortunate luck to die the same day as Stalin. So no one knew he died. Everything was Stalin died, Prokofiev died. So
it was the same. It was the same as your premiere and the Stokowski and the Sputnik flight. Yeah,
exactly the same story. So two Mrs. Prokofievs were at the funeral, going like this. I am. He said, no, you are not. Okay. So two families. So I invited Lena Prokofiev to Miami, and she arrived. She was the most difficult person, as I said, so much so that Stalin had to send her away. She was brilliant woman. She spoke 8 languages without an accent. Perfect Spanish, perfect Chinese, perfect Italian, everything. Brilliant, but but crazy. How Prokofiev, she was from Spain, born in Spain. So she never narrated it. She said, every pretest, her son did. He did a great job. Prokofiev's son. He narrated. She sat on the front row and coughed loud the whole time. And he told me, she's my mother, but she's poor father. That was Lena, famous Lena Prokofiev. There is a book about it called Lena and what was Prokofiev's first name? Sergei and Lena. There is a book called Lena and Sergei, José and Lena, which tells a story. I never read it. It's in my, I don't want to read it because she was enough to leave me without it. But it was great to have her there, Mrs. Prokofiev. As I said, when she met the head of British Airways, she said, it was the worst trip in my life. So she said, I need a hair wash. She said she hadn't washed her hair in about 6 years. So we engaged this lady to wash her hair, a lovely Cuban lady, and they went into a room. 2 minutes later, the Cuban lady walked out. She said, forget it. I don't care how much you pay. I won't have anything to do with this lady. So that was Mrs. Prokofiev. First Mrs. Prokofiev, Lena. Anyway, that tells you more than you asked for.
So, yes, but Jose, I come back to the point. If somebody would like to do it the same way as you did it, I mean, you did incredibly many recordings of high quality. You had lots of orchestras you conducted around the globe, and without having anything to give to your colleagues, yeah, I re-invite you. How was that possible? Is there anything you can tell young conductors?
In general, or you're talking about the Ives Fourth?
In general, how was it possible to do so many of the things you want to do without having the power of your own orchestra to offer to somebody else?
I see. We talk politics. Well, as I told you,
yes.
Yeah, we talk the politics of exchanges. Yeah, I never had to do that. Never had to do that. I made, as you know, nearly 300 recordings. So that's it. I don't have to do any exchanges for that. Record companies ask me to do lately, mostly is Warner Classics. Mostly, I think, because my records, I don't know how they sell, probably well, but they're on the radio, in New York Times Radio, WQXR, Chicago Radio, WFMT, and California, Radio France. They are daily, practically. And I think maybe the reason is there are so many of them, they almost have no choice. There's 50 records, they pick it up, it's probably my record. I enjoy making records, and I do it in a very unusual way. A very special way. I should tell you a little bit about that. When I went to record in London the last time, and they always put a red light and a green light, and I said, remove them. I don't use lights. So my technique is very simple. I record everything from the moment I tell the orchestra, from the moment I say good morning until it's time for intermission, record. And then the producer and I work together, and I hope one day you will produce one of my records. You will be a great producer. So
I know that you know exactly what happened in which moment, which is a real unique gift. I mean, that one first has to remember exactly. And that was very interesting when you recorded in Weimar the Schwarz-Schilling's orchestral works. I realized that you know exactly what you want, which passage in which take. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the technique. And also to record everything. I don't have a red light, and then the musicians, I record the whole session, and then I pick up everything. So it's no secret, really. My records come out very well because of that. And they're fresh sounding because there's no red light telling them, now you concentrate, stay. No, everything is relaxed.
Yeah, it sounds very natural. It sounds as if it were long takes.
Yes, long takes. And then, of course, I, as a producer, is there anything that we missed, any passages out of tune or awkward? I said, well, but then I do maybe 20 bars as a to fix something. But otherwise, they're like a live performance,
Yes.
Bernstein used to say he didn't like recording. his recordings are wonderful, but he felt the need to an audience, the need to play for somebody. So my technique is, I imagine I have an audience. I'm not playing for the microphones. I'm playing for a wider audience, and that's the way it works. My records are pretty good because of that. They are planned for people to listen to.
Yeah, and you're a violinist.
Yeah.
And you have a very good sense of melody, of natural phrasing, and of color. Yeah. So two things that are very important with the orchestra. And I would say that many conductors, particularly today, don't have a lot of great idea about long phrasing. It is an art almost lost.
You're absolutely right. Yes, long phrasing is crucial, and you will know that. And connecting, that is not just here, there, but it's one piece. And
Yeah.
that came perhaps a little bit by intuition, a little bit by my lack of having watched people like Pierre Monteux and the Doráti, Szell, and a few others. So that was crucial, the example of great conductors, and Stokowski, of course.
Yeah.
Stokowski, I shouldn't say and, I will put him first. He had a great sense of line.
Yeah, and Jose, you did most of these Stokowski arrangements also. You re-recorded them in modern sound.
Yes.
Like the complete Bach arrangements, the Wagner arrangements,
That was a tricky thing.
the Mussorgsky arrangements.
I didn't accept it at first when RCA, I think it was RCA, asked me to record the Toccata and Fugue, one of Stokowski's most famous arrangements, orchestrations. And I said, I can compete, I cannot do it. Very difficult to, but I did it with Bournemouth, I think, and the work came out very well. But otherwise, I tried to stay out of competing with the great conductors,
What shall we compete about? Yeah, I mean, I had the good luck to study with one of the greatest conductors of any time, and I cannot. I mean, it makes no sense to even think about neither competition nor imitation. Yeah, so it's. But of course, all the things are inhaled; they are there.
Yeah, you absorb, examples and so on. Here, I know you're using this for public use, this interview, but let me ask you a personal question again. If I invite you to be as producer on one of my next recordings in Europe, which is being planned right now, I think it'll be in Europe, I hope you will accept. I'll tell you what it is. A concerto for two pianos and orchestra. I think I mentioned it to you.
By Ellen Taffy's Village.
Yeah.
Yes.
She confided me the confidence for me to record it, and we still don't know whether we'll record it in New York or in Europe someplace. I think I wrote to you about that.
Yes.
So she wrote this concerto for two pianos for two identical twins, two ladies.
Do you know that when I met John Corigliano in 2001 and in New York, just before the Twin Towers fell, and he told me that I don't know who had asked him to write a concerto for two pianos left hand. And he turned the commission down because he said this is perverted. And he spoke about something like asking Xenakis to write a piece for two plus-side players. And do you know who accepted the commission and did it?
No.
Who could do that? William Balcom.
Of course, yeah, he would. He's a very good composer.
Yes, he can do everything. He's this kind of all-rounder. Yeah.
Sure. Bill Balcom. He's a good friend and a very good composer. Should be played more. I'm glad you mentioned John Corigliano. He's a very good friend of mine. He's a very fine composer. His violin, of course, his father was a very fine violinist. He was a concertmaster in the New York Philharmonic, And so his violin concerto is a very special work. But other works, I often done his concerto for flute and orchestra. I did it in Spain and in Rome and in China.
It was
John,
great for James Galway.
yes.
Yeah. Yes, yes. He always had great commissioners. Yes. So, Jose, I'm very happy. This is very interesting. I think we should continue this talk.
All right.
If we
Right
go
up,
too long,
yes.
maybe we have
Chapter 2. Chapter
we will lose people if it goes on too long. But it is very, very interesting, and it is so revealing about many things, and also speaking about these things which are now 70 years ago, like it just happened. Yeah.
Of course, yes. You're right. Very well put,
So
indeed.
it would say that next time we speak about your youth in Uruguay,
Sure.
and maybe also about Ephraim Zimbalist.
Yes.
You told me very amusing thing,
Yes.
and we speak about the more recent time. Yes,
Correct.
we have a perspective of lots of things to talk about, and for today, I recommend to everybody, just as an example, this wonderful film music of Shostakovich. I don't know whether it's still available.
Oh, yes, yes. On CD.
Yes.
But you have the LP there, but it's out on CD.
Outstanding. And I mean, the most outstanding, of course, is the Gadfly music
Yes, it's beautiful.
with this Bach paraphrase, which is so incredible. Yeah.
The CD that's out is the reason it's out and is together with something conducted by André Previn. André Previn conducting the Fifth Symphony, and in my case is the Gadfly or whatever you mentioned. I don't remember. I did all of Shostakovich film scores, but that's a CD which I've seen recently advertised. Wonderful to talk to you. Great pleasure. It's really a special pleasure to speak with you. You're amazing, man.
My pleasure. And thank you very much. And we will continue soon.
Yep, let me know. All the best.
All the best to you.
The best. Stay well. Say good.